Okay, today we're going to be taking a look at section P7, part A, which is solving equations and solving for variables. The types of equations that we're going to be solving for are just basic equations that we learned about in Algebra 1 and 2, and the other is where we're going to solve dealing with rational equations. Remember, rational means with a fraction, and so we're going to talk about how to solve equations that have fractions. All right, so first of all, let's talk about just a normal type of equation like this top one here. And what we're going to be doing to begin with is just distributing. So we distribute the 2, get 2a minus 6 minus 17 equals 13 minus 3a minus 36. Combine your like terms, you get 2a minus 23 equals negative 3a minus 23. I'm going to add 3a to both sides, get the a's on one side. I'm going to add this 23 to move it over to the other side. Let me move this other piece down a little. And then what you end up getting is 5a equals 0. Divide both sides by 5. And a equals 0. Now on some tests when I put the answer to be 0, I get a lot of times people put no solution. Remember, 0 can be a solution, and that is a solution. And if you were to plug that 0 back in, it would work. So the next thing I want to do is I want to take a look at the next equation, which deals with irrational numbers here. We got fractions. First of all, when I see the fractions, I never subtract a fraction. I always add the opposite. So I'm going to add the opposite here. Then what I'm going to look at is, since I have an equal sign, I can multiply both sides by the same thing. What I'm going to multiply both sides by is the common denominator. The common denominator between 4 and 3 and 1 is 12. So when I multiply both sides by 12, I multiply both sides by 12. And so I'm going to now distribute that 12, and I'm going to get 12 times b plus 2 over 4 plus 12 times a negative b plus 1 over 3 equals 2 times 12. Now what this allows me to do is it allows me to simplify these, and it basically cancels out the denominators. 3 goes into 12 4 times, and so now I can just distribute. So the 3 times b plus 2 is 3b plus 6, plus distribute the 4, negative 4b plus 4 equals 24. Combine my like terms over here, I get a negative b plus 10 equals 24. Subtract 10 from both sides, I get negative b equals 14. Divide by a negative 1, I get b equals negative 14. And there's my answer. Okay, so let's try another one of those. So the next one I'm going to try is this one with c as my variable. I see that I'm subtracting fractions. The first thing I do is I never subtract a fraction. I always add the opposite. I then find my common denominator. My common denominator between 4, 14, and 7 is 28. And with the fact that there's an equal sign, I can multiply both sides by 28. Now I can multiply this whole side times 28, but then what happens is I distribute that 28 into both of those. At that point, I'm going to go back. 28 is, oh wait, excuse me. Let me keep going. 4 goes into 28 7 times. 14 goes into 28 2 times. 7 goes into 28 4 times. So I distribute the 7 and I get 7c minus 21 equals 2 times 5 is 10 plus 4 times a negative c is a negative 4c. 4 times a negative 5 is a negative 20. Combining my like terms, I get 7c minus 21 equals negative 4c minus 10. Add 4c to both sides. Add the 21 to both sides. And I'm going to get 11c equals 11. Divide both sides by 11, excuse me, and I get c equals 1. And so there's my answer. So again, when there's an equal sign, that's when you can multiply both sides by the same thing. And I'm multiplying both sides by the common denominator, and that eliminates my denominator. Okay, so let's move on to the next page, where again we have rational equations, equations with fractions. And this time my variable's in the denominator. Now, when the variable's in the denominator, we have a couple things we have to do. First of all, we have to find the common denominator. And so to find the common denominator, I'm going to factor this one right here. And when I factor d squared plus 4d minus 12, I'm going to get d plus 6 and d minus 2. The next thing before I do anything else is I'm going to go back to the last test, and I'm going to remember that I'm supposed to write down what the variable cannot equal. So I'm going to write that down, that the variable cannot equal negative 6 nor 2, because that would make the denominator 0. I did not have to do that back on this slide because my denominators never had a variable. This one, the denominators have a variable, so I'm going to write down what d cannot equal. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my common denominator. My common denominators are d plus 6 and d minus 2. So I'm going to multiply both sides by d plus 6 times d minus 2. So I'm going to multiply everything by d plus 6 and a d minus 2. I'm going to multiply this by a d plus 6 and a d minus 2. I'm going to multiply this by a d plus 6 and a d minus 2. And what's going to happen is that I can cancel out the d plus 6's, distribute the 3, and I get 3d minus 6 plus d minus 2's. Cancel, I get 1 times d plus 6 is d plus 6 equals the d plus 6 cancels and the d minus 2 cancel, and I just get 4. Combine my like terms, I got 3d plus d comes out to be 4d. Minus 6 plus 6 cancel, and I get equals 4. Divide both sides by 4, and I get d equals 1. Now, there's my answer, except I need to check to see if that is one of the things that d cannot equal, and it is not. So this is good. There's my answer. The only reason we write these down right now is to make sure that when we get our answer, that it's a legitimate answer. So the next thing I'm going to do is just do the same thing here with the e's. Now we have an equal sign again, and I'm going to move this over so I have a little bit more room to work with this. And I see that I have a minus. Again, I never subtract. Oops, let me get red. I always add the opposite. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to find my common denominator by factoring this one right here. And I'm going to get e minus 1 and e plus 1. So my common denominator is e minus 1, e plus 1. And so when I when I multiply both sides by that, if I want to, I can rewrite this. And I'm going to get, whoops, not go quite so far. I'm going to get 1 over e plus 1. I'm just doing this so I have a little bit more room to work. 2 over e minus 1, e plus 1, plus a negative 1 over e minus 1. Multiply both sides by that common denominator, which is e minus 1 times e plus 1. Multiply this by e minus 1, e plus 1. E minus 1, e plus 1. And then I'm going to cancel out, or simplify, distribute the 1, which gets me e minus 1, equals the e minus 1's cancel and the e plus 1's cancel. And I'm left with 2 plus the e minus 1's cancel, and I distribute the negative 1, and I get negative e minus 1. So at this point, I combine my like terms, and I get e minus 1 equals a negative e plus 1. I'm going to add my e over, and I'm going to add that here. I'm going to add this 1 over, and I'm going to get 2e equals 2, and e equals 1. Now, the one thing I did forget to do is to find out what e cannot equal. And so if I look, e cannot equal a positive or a negative 1. And if you take a look, that's what I ended up getting. That can't happen, because if e was 1, that would make this piece right here 0. So what I'm going to have to do is just say that since it can't be 1, and that's the answer I got, there is no solution to this problem, because the only thing that would work is 1, and 1 can't work. So there's no solution to this problem. Okay, so those are the rational equations. Now what we want to do is we want to solve for variables. And to do this, what we're going to do is just take a look at a couple of equations. It will always tell you what to solve for. Now in this top one I made a typo, and it should just say to solve for w. So I want to solve this equation for w, which means that I want to get w by itself. To get the w by itself, that means I need to get rid of the L. And if I look at what they're doing, they're multiplying. To get rid of multiply, I divide both sides by what I don't want, and that's the L. And so now I get A over L equals, those L's cancel, and I get W, and there's my answer. That's all that there is to those. Again, you want to get the variable that they want to solve for by itself. Then, on the next one, there's a little difference here, because they're asking us to solve for p, and we got rational equations. And the variable is in the denominator. So what we have to do to get that variable out of the denominator is we need to multiply all the sides by the common, all the parts by the common denominator. Okay, that will get rid of the fraction, which will make this a lot easier to work with. So I'm going to find that my common denominator here is p, q, and f. So I'm going to multiply each piece by p, q, and f. P, q, and f. P, q, and f. Now here the p's will cancel, and I'm going to get qf plus the q's cancel, and I get pf equals the f cancels, and I get pq. So the first step was to get rid of the fractions by multiplying by the common denominator. The next thing that I'm going to do is to remember what I'm trying to solve for. And I'm trying to solve for p. That means I need to get p by itself. Well, I see that I have p here and here. It's on both sides of the equation. What I want to do is I want to get the variable I'm solving for, this p, on one side, and everything that doesn't contain a p, which is this guy right here, on opposite sides of the equal sign. So let me rephrase that. I want to get everything that has a p, the variable I'm solving for, on one side of the equation, and everything that does not have the p on the other side. So I'm going to move this pf over. So I'm going to get qf equals pq minus pf. I'm going to subtract that over. Now I've got both pieces that contain the p on one side and the one that does not contain the p on the other side. This next part is what some people call a little bit tricky, but I'm trying to get the p by itself. That's what it says here. So I'm trying to isolate that p. I'm trying to pull it away from the others. To pull it away from the others, I'm going to factor it out in front. And I get equals qf. Now, we've got a multiplication, so I divide by q minus f. Divide by q minus f. Those will cancel. And then my answer is p equals qf over q minus f. Okay, so again, solving for a variable, if you have a fraction, the first thing you want to do is get rid of the fraction by multiplying everything by the common denominator. Get the variable you're solving for on one side of the equation and everything that doesn't contain that variable on the other. Factor that p out. You want to isolate that variable, so you factor it out, and then we divide, and we get our answer. All right, your assignment is to now do section P7, part A in the homework. Thank you.